It is the fall of 1850, and on a bend of the Mississippi River, a sound rolls across the water that stops entire towns in their tracks. A high, shrieking melody, half music and half warning, drifting for miles over the cotton fields and the cypress swamps. It is the calliope, the steam organ mounted on the deck of an approaching riverboat, and in a world without telegraph wires reaching every farmhouse, without daily newspapers in half these river towns, that sound means only one thing. The boat is coming. And for the next few hours, an ordinary Tuesday in the middle of nowhere is about to become the most exciting day of the month. But here is what almost nobody standing on that riverbank knows. The very boat they are running toward, the one throwing black smoke into the sky and churning the brown water white behind its wheel, has, on average, less than 5 years left to live. It might not even have that long. Somewhere on the Mississippi and its tributaries in 1850, there is a decent chance that within the next 12 months, this boat, or one just like it, will hit a submerged log at full speed, or catch fire in the middle of the night, or, worst of all, have its boilers explode without a second of warning, hurling deck planks and human bodies 100 feet into the air. Between 1810 and 1850 alone, an estimated 4,000 people have already died this way on America's western rivers. And still, every single day, thousands of ordinary Americans walk up the gangplank anyway, because for a nation racing westward in the years before the Civil War, the riverboat is not a luxury. It is survival. It is opportunity. It is, quite literally, the fastest way to get anywhere that matters. So what was it actually like to live aboard one of these boats in 1850? Not the postcard version, not the calliope and the string of paper lanterns, but the real, sweating, cold-choked, class-divided, deeply unequal world that existed on a few hundred feet of wooden deck floating down the largest river system in North America. That is the story we are about to tell. Picture the boat itself first, because nothing about it is accidental. A typical Mississippi steamboat of 1850 is a flat-bottomed, shallow-draft vessel, built not for the ocean but for a river that can turn from a raging flood to a maze of sandbars within a single season. It might stretch somewhere between 100 and 250 feet long, a wooden wedding cake of a vessel stacked 3 or 4 decks high, crowned with twin smokestacks that some captains decorate with feathery iron crowns, as much a status symbol as a chimney. Below the waterline, or what passes for a waterline on a river this shallow, sit the boilers. Loud, temperamental, and often poorly maintained, they are the beating, dangerous heart of the entire operation, and almost everyone aboard, from the richest passenger to the lowest deckhand, understands, in the back of their mind, that those boilers could kill them all before lunch. Now, walk up that gangplank yourself, and here is the first thing you notice. This boat is not one world. It is two, stacked directly on top of each other, and which one you experience depends entirely on how much money is in your pocket. Down on the main deck, level with the water, life is loud, filthy, and unglamorous. This is where the cargo lives. Bales of cotton stacked to the ceiling, barrels of pork and flour, crates of manufactured goods heading upriver to towns that have nothing but the river to connect them to the rest of the country. And packed in among the freight are the deck passengers, the poorest travelers on board, men and women who cannot afford a cabin and so pay a fraction of the fare to sleep among the crates, cook their own meals over open fires when the crew allows it, and endure the full, unfiltered roar of the engines just a few feet away. For immigrants pushing west, for laborers chasing work, for anyone without much money, the main deck is the only Mississippi they will ever know. It is loud enough to make conversation difficult, hot enough near the boilers to be genuinely dangerous, and it is also, grimly, the most exposed part of the boat when disaster strikes. When a boiler goes, it is very often the deck passengers, packed closest to the machinery, who pay the highest price. And then you climb the stairs, and the entire world changes. Up on the boiler deck and above, cabin passengers move through a completely different America. This is the floating version of a grand hotel, something almost absurd given that it is balanced on a wooden hull chugging through some of the most treacherous water in the country. There is a Grand Saloon running down the center of the boat, sometimes stretching nearly the full length of the vessel, lined with ornate columns, gilded mirrors, patterned carpets, and crystal chandeliers that somehow stay lit despite the constant vibration of the engines below. Meals here are lavish, multi-course affairs, sometimes featuring fresh game, oysters packed in ice, wines shipped up from New Orleans, and service that would not embarrass a fine hotel in Boston or New York. In the evenings, the saloon transforms. Furniture gets pushed back, a small orchestra or a lone fiddler strikes up a tune, and cabin passengers dance, quite literally, on top of the same water that could, without warning, swallow the whole boat whole. It is worth pausing here on something that made Mississippi steamboat travel genuinely radical for its time. Unlike the stagecoach, unlike travel by horseback, the steamboat offered comfort at a scale that had simply never existed for river and frontier travel before. People who had spent days or weeks jolting along rutted roads suddenly found themselves gliding smoothly downriver at speeds that, by 1850, could carry a boat from New Orleans to Louisville in roughly 4.5 days, a trip that had taken the very first steamboat on this river, back in 1816, a grueling 25 days to complete. That improvement, from 25 days to 4.5, in barely 3 decades, tells you everything about how fast this technology was transforming American life. And it is exactly that speed, that competitive advantage, that is about to introduce one of the darkest and most reckless traditions of the entire riverboat era. Because if there is one thing an 1850s steamboat captain cannot resist, it is a challenge. 2 boats leaving the same dock at roughly the same time. 2 captains, each convinced his engine, his crew, his boat is faster. And so, spontaneously, without any planning, without any safety inspection, a race begins. Passengers crowd the rails, cheering as their boat pulls even, then ahead, then falls behind again. Down in the engine room, firemen shovel wood and coal into the furnace faster and faster, and somewhere, someone, either the captain himself or an overeager engineer chasing a few extra pounds of steam pressure, ties down the safety valve. That single decision, tying down a valve designed specifically to release excess pressure before the boiler explodes, has killed more people on the Mississippi than almost any other single cause. Historians studying the western rivers in this exact period found something chilling. Between 1830 and 1850, boiler explosions on western rivers happened at roughly twice the rate seen anywhere else in the country, killing 3 times as many people, even though these boats made up less than half of all the steamboat tonnage nationwide. Racing didn't cause every one of those disasters. But it caused a horrifying number of them, and everyone who boarded a boat in 1850 knew it. And sometimes, the disaster wasn't a race at all. Sometimes it was simply bad luck, bad maintenance, and a river that gave no warnings before it turned deadly. Take what happened just weeks before Christmas in 1850, in the port of New Orleans itself. A brand new steamboat, the Anglo-Norman, pulled away from the dock on December 14 for what was supposed to be a routine demonstration cruise, a chance to show off the vessel to potential passengers and investors. A couple of hours into the trip, as the boat turned to head back toward port, something went catastrophically wrong. All of her boilers exploded at once. Not one, not 2, all of them, simultaneously, tearing the boat apart in an instant. At least 100 people died that afternoon, on a boat that had barely left the dock, on a trip that was never even meant to carry real passengers or real cargo. One survivor, a newspaper writer who lived through the blast, later published an account of the experience under a title that says more than any statistic could, the experience of a blown-up man. That is the Mississippi River in 1850. A place where an afternoon pleasure cruise, in a brand new boat, could end in mass death before the sun went down. It is worth asking, at this point, why anyone got on these boats at all, knowing what could happen. And the honest answer is that most people simply had no better option. The Mississippi and its tributaries were, for enormous stretches of the American interior, the only real highway that existed. Railroads were still spreading unevenly across the country in 1850, and for huge swaths of Louisiana, Mississippi, Arkansas, and the territories further west, a steamboat wasn't a convenience. It was the only regular connection to the outside world. Farmers depended on it to ship their cotton and grain to market. Families depended on it to reach relatives, to resettle in new territory, to reach doctors, courts, and opportunities that simply didn't exist within walking distance of home. Between 1800 and 1860, the white population of Mississippi alone grew from just over 5,000 people to more than 350,000, and the enslaved population, tragically, grew right alongside it. New Orleans itself exploded from around 17,000 residents in 1810 to well over 100,000 by 1850. None of that growth happens without the river, and the river, in the age before railroads dominated the landscape, means the steamboat. And that brings us to one of the most painful and essential truths about life on a Mississippi riverboat in 1850, one that no honest documentary can leave out. This river, and these boats, existed inside a slave society, and the steamboat itself became one of the machines of that system. Enslaved people were transported along the Mississippi in staggering numbers in this era, sold downriver from the upper South to the brutal cotton and sugar plantations of the deep South, a forced journey that separated families and became, in the words of enslaved people themselves, one of the most feared phrases in American slavery. To be sold down the river meant exactly this, a one-way trip on a boat like the ones we've been describing, toward conditions that were, if anything, even harsher than what had come before. At the very same time, the cotton economy that filled the main decks of these boats with towering stacks of bales, the same cotton economy that funded the crystal chandeliers and multi-course dinners up on the boiler deck, was built entirely on the forced, unpaid labor of enslaved people working the plantations that lined the riverbanks. The Grand Saloon and the slave pen existed on the very same river, often on the very same boat, at the very same moment in history. Understanding 1850s river life honestly means holding both of those realities at once. Meanwhile, the crew that actually kept these boats running lived in a world of relentless, dangerous labor that the well-dressed cabin passengers upstairs rarely thought twice about. Deckhands, many of them Irish or German immigrants, many of them enslaved or free black men working for wages, loaded and unloaded thousands of pounds of cargo at every single stop, often in brutal heat, often working through the night. Down along the riverbanks, an entire economy grew up just to feed these boats' insatiable appetite for fuel. Thousands of woodyards lined the Mississippi by the 1850s, small operations where local farmers chopped cordwood into 4-foot lengths and stacked it along the shore, waiting for a boat's whistle. When the pilot needed fuel, he'd ring the boat's bell, and if it happened to be dark or foggy, the farmer would light a bonfire on the bank just so the boat could find him. It's a strange, almost quiet detail buried inside all this steam and spectacle, small fires burning along a dark riverbank, guiding 100-ton vessels safely to shore, one delivery of firewood at a time. And then there is the person who, arguably, held more raw responsibility than anyone else on board, and yet is rarely the one people picture when they imagine a riverboat. The pilot. Steering a Mississippi steamboat in 1850 was not simply a matter of pointing the boat downstream and holding the wheel steady. The river changed constantly, sandbars shifting from month to month, whole channels rerouting themselves after a single flood season, submerged trees and logs, known ominously as snags and sawyers, lurking just beneath the surface waiting to tear open a wooden hull. A skilled pilot didn't just know the river. He had memorized it, mile by mile, depth by depth, landmark by landmark, essentially carrying an enormous, constantly updating map inside his own head, because a single moment of misjudgment could run a boat aground, or worse, rip its bottom open on a hidden obstacle miles from any help. This job demanded such precision and such nerve that it commanded serious respect and serious pay, and it would go on, just a few years later, to be immortalized by a young riverboat pilot named Samuel Clemens, who would eventually write about his own cub pilot days on this very river under a pen name borrowed directly from the leadsman's call that measured safe water depth, Mark Twain. As evening falls on our imagined 1850 riverboat, the contrasts of this world become even sharper. Up in the Grand Saloon, cabin passengers are dressed for dinner, the orchestra tuning up, waiters carrying trays between tables set with real silver. Down on the main deck, deck passengers are settling in among the cargo for another night with the ground itself as their bed, if you can call packed cotton bales and crate lids the ground. Somewhere in between, gamblers are finding their favorite hunting ground. The riverboat, with its captive, often bored, often wealthy audience trapped together for days at a time, became one of the most famous gambling arenas in American history. Professional card sharps worked these boats constantly, some of them building small fortunes by fleecing overconfident planters and merchants who thought a friendly game of poker was simply a way to pass the evening. It wasn't uncommon for a single hand of cards to change hands worth more money than a deckhand would earn in an entire year. And through all of it, the boat keeps moving, day and night, because time on the river is money, and a boat sitting still is a boat losing its owner's cash. Firemen work in punishing shifts, feeding the furnace around the clock. The pilot changes watch, but the boat never truly stops watching the water. And passengers, whether in silk or in work clothes, whether free or enslaved, whether cabin or deck, all share one thing in common that no amount of money can change. They are all, every single one of them, at the mercy of a wooden boat, a temperamental boiler, and a river that has already claimed thousands of lives and shows no sign of slowing down. By the early 1850s, this entire world is already standing on borrowed time, though almost nobody realizes it yet. Railroads are beginning to creep across the same territory the steamboats have dominated for decades, and within just a few years, the first railroad bridge will span the Mississippi itself, in 1856, at Rock Island, Illinois, a quiet but seismic shift that steamboat owners will immediately recognize as an existential threat. The golden era of the Mississippi riverboat, with its calliopes and grand saloons and reckless races, still has decades of life left in it, and will even see a brief, dramatic resurgence during the Civil War. But the writing, in a sense, is already on the water. For the people living through 1850 itself, though, none of that future matters yet. What matters is the calliope sound drifting over the fields. What matters is the gangplank lowering, the deckhands shouting, the smell of coal smoke and river mud and roasting meat drifting up from the galley. What matters is the simple, electrifying fact that for a few hours, or a few days, an entire floating world of luxury and labor, hope and danger, freedom and bondage, has arrived at your town, and it is, for better and for worse, about to carry you somewhere you have never been. If you had lived in 1850, and you had to choose, would you have taken your chances on that gangplank, knowing what you now know about the boilers, the races, and the risks, or would you have found another way to travel? Tell us honestly in the comments below.